So what would you think if you saw me standing along 340 with my sign? Crazy, maybe? And if you stopped and offered me money and I said, I don't need your money, I'm here to give, definitely crazy? Well, on Friday, July 14th, that's what I did. So that morning at 7 o'clock, I got in my car and I asked God one more time, are you sure this is what you want me to do? Now, I knew the answer, but I was basically telling God, this is crazy. So as I drove to Waynesboro, I played this song that you just heard 3 times on my way to Waynesboro. And as I pulled into the parking lot of the hotel there by the interstate, it went to the next song. And it was a song called Your Touch by Cutlass. And I sat there and thought, yeah, I'm going to need God's touch today. I'm going to need His presence to get through this morning. So I got out of my car, walked up to the exit ramp off the interstate, and just sat there with my backpack and my sign, and people started coming off the interstate, pretty much not noticing me as far as I could tell. In fact, I was sitting there and there was one car at the light that was past me, and the next car came up and she stopped 2 car lengths behind the first one. I'm like, this lady does not want to be near me. So anyways, I'd been there for like 15 minutes, and I happened to look across 340, and I saw this guy on a bike. Well, where I was at, I'd seen this guy with the bike several mornings. So I was like, okay, I got his spot. I wasn't sure if he'd be there. He's not there every morning, so anyway. And I saw him start to come across, but then he turned and went back 340 toward Waynesboro. I said, well, I guess he's going to try another spot. So, that was like 15 minutes after I'd been there. And another 15 minutes went by, nothing was happening. And I started to ask God, was this really what you wanted me to do? And a few minutes later, there was a line of cars in front of me, and a truck came up in the right turn lane. So it was on the other side of these cars. And I saw him, he pointed out the window. I figured he was pointing at my sign. So I was like, oh, finally, someone sees it and recognizes me. And so I gave him a thumbs up. Well, evidently, that's not what he meant, because he started shaking his head and going, no, 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 no. I was like, ouch. But as he started to drive off, I yelled, God bless you. I don't know if he heard me or not, but God was telling me that's the attitude I needed in my heart. And then a few minutes later, I was there leaning against the guardrail, and a guy pulled up, and he was right in front of me. And he put down his window and held up a bottle of water and said, you want some water? I said, no, I have some. And then I walked over to him and said, you like listening to music? He said, yeah. And I said, you like hard rock? He said, yeah. So I handed him a Disciple CD and said, listen to that. They're pretty good. And then so he went on. And then it kind of went back to watching cars go by. I was trying to watch people as they come up to get a read on them. And some of them would come up and I'd see them reaching over. I was like, oh, they're going to offer me money. And no, they're reaching for their cell phone. I saw so many people with their cell phone. And then, I was like, all right, nothing's happening. I had like 35 CDs and books. I'm like, I'm never going to get rid of all these. And I started asking God, am I in the right place? Do I need to move? And I had been there an hour when the guy on the bike came back. And this time he rode up to me, and he asked me, how long are you going to be here? And I said, you want this spot? And he said, yeah, I need to get some money for some food. And I was like, okay, you can have it. And then I reached in my bag and got out a book by Mark Hall called The Well. And so I wanted to share that with him. But I'm like, I've been taught you got to meet their physical need too. So I gave him the book and $5. Figured that would maybe buy him lunch. And then I walked across 340 and down the median, down to the intersection with Lou DeWitt. So God had used this man to get me to move. I didn't realize it at the time, but now that I look back, he was answering my prayer. So I got down to Lou DeWitt, and kind of the same thing was happening. People were driving by. But then, a little bit after being down there, a car was driving up, and they waved, so I waved back. And then the next car waved, I waved back. And then a car that was all the way across in the right turn lane, 5 lanes across, the passenger put his hand out the window and was waving. And so I waved, and then, then a whole stream of cars coming in, and there was, a 4th wave, a 5th one, a 6th one, a 7th. And so I was like, it gave me a little encouragement. I was like, okay, they see the sign, and I'm not wasting my time. Eventually, I was standing there, and this lady was stopped. She was about 3 cars back, and she put down her window and said, God loves you too. And I was like, I know he does, and just talked to her for a little bit. And then I asked her, do you like Duck Dynasty? And she said, I've never watched it. But anyway, I pulled out a little pink fake leather devotion of Duck Dynasty, and I gave that to her. A little bit later, a man who was in about the same spot she was, he was sitting there, and I glanced at him, and he looked at me, and he had a full beard, and you couldn't really see his mouth, but I remember his eyes. He looked like he had sad eyes. But so, he kind of nodded at me, and I nodded back, and then he put his window down and said, I think that's the best sign ever. And I told him, I think you're right. And I walked over to him, handed him a book, and then walked back to where I was standing. Well, in all this time, I thought, how am I going to do this in 15 to 30 seconds with the light constantly changing? So I was standing there, and he was sitting there, and I'm like, man, is this light ever going to change? And then he put his window down again, and he said, I really like your shirt. And I told him it was Seventh-day Slumber, they're a Christian rock band. And then about that time, the light changed, and as he drove off, I said, check him out on YouTube. So that was my little encounter with him. Then I had a couple people that I like to call the rollers. The first guy, not holy rollers, just rollers. The first guy, I looked up, and he had his arm out with a bill folded up in it, and he was just driving by, and so I'm a rookie at panhandling. So I'm like, am I supposed to just grab that out of his hand? And so as he went by, I didn't want his money, so I just stood there, and he drove by. Well, he got stuck at the light. He got stopped at the light, and he still had his arm out. So I walked up to him and said, I don't need any money. I want to give you something. So I asked him, do you like to hunt? And he said, I used to. Then I got married. And yeah, I see some of you guys rolling your eyes, but it's more. He said, I got married, and she's a vegetarian. So I was like, oh, now what do I do? But anyway, I had a book. It's called A Look at Life from a Deer Stand. So I said, well, here, this has a lot of great hunting stories and a message of God. So I gave that to him, and then went back to my place. I need some water. So the next roller was a woman, and she came up, and she slowed down as she approached me. And this was happening so quick, I just reached in my bag, and I grabbed out a CD, and I handed it to her as she went by. And then she got stopped at the light too. And then I realized I'd given her a Disciple CD. They're hard rock, so I'm like, she might not like that. So I walked up to her car, it said, do you like hard rock or just rock? And she said, just rock. So I gave her a 10th Avenue North CD, and you'll probably like this, and she handed the Disciple CD back to me. And then there was a lady, she came rolling up, and she had her hand out, and she was still in a bit of a hurry, I think. She said, because I said, no, I don't need it. And she's like, just take it. And I was like, no, I want to give you something. And I reached in my bag to grab a book, I forget what it was, but I dropped it on the ground. And she was like ready to pull off. And so I grabbed it real quick and handed it to her. And then she was gone. Let's see, there was another lady that she had come up and stopped for the light. And she offered me some money, and I came over and told her, I wasn't taking today, I was giving. And she started to say that she was from a very strong church, and what went through my mind is, well, it's not Stewart's Draft Baptist. So, but and I was like, that's fine, but here, take this book. And I was giving her Mark Hall's book, Thrive. And she said, no, I don't need it. I'm at a really strong church and all this stuff. And I said, well, you can share it with someone else. So she took the book and was on her way. Another lady that came up, she put her hand out and was waving a couple bills in her hands. And I walked up to her and said, I didn't need the money, and I wanted to give her something. And she was telling me how she had actually sat out there on 340, asking for money. And that when she saw someone doing that, she liked to stop and try and give back. She also explained that she hoped she didn't have to do that anymore. She got her Social Security straightened out. So she talked about a couple of things. So anyway, that was her. So that was most of the people I met. But there's a moment that I like to call the God moment. Now that morning, I knew my daughter was going to my house to meet Lisa to go shopping. And so she'd have to come through that intersection. So I remember when I was walking down to that intersection, I was watching to see if she would come out at that time. And for the most part, I had my back to that intersection, so I didn't see what was going on. And but every now, maybe like once or twice, I glanced over my shoulder just to look. But I was standing there, and I'd been standing down there at Louis DeWitt for about an hour and a half. And then something, God, told me to look back over my shoulder. And I did. I looked back over, and there was Kristen. She was actually driving her grandfather's truck, which was very distinguishable and easy to pick out. Her car was in the shop. So I saw that truck coming up. I said, there's Kristen. And I'm like, I hadn't been looking back, so I was kind of shocked. But then I was like, wait a minute, she's in the wrong lane. She can't turn and go to my house in that lane. And then I saw her, she went across 340 and into Starbucks. And I said, that's Kristen. So I glanced back and saw her up at the drive-through window. And then I glanced back again, and she was up to the light. And then I heard those cars starting to come forward. So I turned around and held up my sign for her, and she waved to me. But I say that's a God moment. God was with me all morning, but I think right there he was telling me that I was not alone, that he was with me and there's other people with me. So just to recap that morning, I was standing in the sun for like 3 hours. I talked to 10 people, plus Martha Jane, who had come by at one point. She didn't get a book or CD. Sorry. See me if you want one. I got plenty. But so I talked to 10 people, giving away 7 books and 3 CDs. And 6 of the people had offered me money. One offered me water, and two had offered encouragement. And the emotions that morning that I went through, I was frustrated, and then I was amazed. I was discouraged and uplifted. There was times I laughed, and then there was times I nearly cried. Basically, the whole morning was crazy. But what's really crazy is that God would love a wretch like me and want to use me to tell other people that he loved them. And he also wants to use you guys. And John Jorgensen, he's a spoken word artist, speaker, vlogger, and he has one video out called "Does God Respond to Prayer?" And in this video, let's see, I want to get his words right. He was basically saying that God likes to use us to answer prayer. That, people will lift up a prayer to God, and God will turn that prayer request into a calling on someone else. And this happened about 2 months ago to me. I was sitting back at the soundboard, and this young woman came in partially into the service and sat down about 3 rows up from me, and we were kind of sparse that day, so no one was around her. And I started wondering if she knew anyone in the church or if she was just a random visitor. And as I was sitting there, God reminded me of Lacey Sturm's story. And I won't share that with you right now, but just know that her story was that she desperately needed to know that God loved her. And so I said a prayer to God. I said, Lord, if someone needs to speak to this young woman, then please lead them to do that. And when the service was over, I saw some women come up to talk to her. And so I'm like, okay, I'm off the hook. And I later found out that this woman definitely needed to hear that God loved her. And that a woman from this congregation spent that afternoon with her, showing her God's love and telling her of God's love. So again, that was God using one of us to answer prayer. Back to John's video. He said, perhaps it's not that God isn't responding to prayers. Perhaps it's that we're not responding to God's call to answer them. He concludes his video with, the question is not, who's going to answer my prayer? The question is, whose prayer is God going to use me to answer? He says, the question is not, will God respond? The question is, will you? Now, I know there's a lot of people in here, they volunteer in the community, do mission work, and so I just wanted to share this story with you to encourage you, to respond to God. So that when God says, who will go and tell the world I love them, that you would respond, send me.